Welcome to this episode of the Wellbeing Room. I'm delighted today to have the amazing Mira Rao join me in the Wellbeing Room today to talk all things nervous system regulation based stuff that she's just an expert on. So we're just going to dive right in. So welcome, Mira. Thanks for joining me today.
Oh, thanks, Leah. It's really beautiful to be here. I don't know how much of an expert I am, but I do my best. I try to learn. It's a very exciting topic and I will share what I can.
No, absolutely. And I think you probably know more than you think you know. Someone told me that the other day and I was like, yes, they're probably right. And, you've been diving into this stuff for a while and
long time
with people for a long time. So yeah, and I really respect and admire the work you do. I've had, coaching and counseling sessions with you, so I can vouch for your credibility and your ability to do the job. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Appreciate that.
No, you're welcome. So to move along and just get the discussion going, you recently posted a video on your Instagram about something called regular regulation. And this kind of really piqued my interest, and this is kind of what brought us together today to have this discussion, is this idea. And I was just wondering if you could share a bit about it. What your thoughts are on how we can regulate ourselves. Maybe, regulation to me seems like, from what I've learned over the last year or so, working with you and stuff, is about, I guess you could probably explain it better, so I should probably just leave it to you, but it's about the nervous system and getting things under control. That's kind of how I see it. So if you want to be a bit more eloquent, then please take it away.
I'll give it my best shot. So I'll start with that question around what is regular regulation. So regulating the nervous... Deb Dana, who's one of my idols, talks about the rhythm of regulation. So a well-regulated nervous system is a flexible nervous system. So this essentially means that the nervous system can respond appropriately to circumstances, which is what it's designed to do, and return to baseline. Baseline being somewhere that's pretty calm and rested. That should be our baseline experience. I feel safe. I feel okay. The world is okay. That's where we want to be based. And then, now there's a threat, I can go into some kind of survival response. I can deal with it. So it's not about simply becoming calm all the time, because life has ups and downs and challenges and different things going on. So our nervous system responses are adaptive responses. They are survival responses. They help us meet true, real threats in the world and deal with them. The problem that we are all encountering is that because of trauma and because of stress, so stress registers in the nervous system in a very similar way. It's overwhelmed, it's too much. The nervous system is on. We struggle to return to baseline. So all the settings have been changed such that we are constantly in the survival state and not very often in baseline. So regular regulation is a conscious practice of coming back to baseline more often, more frequently during the day, bringing your mindfulness to it, to do that so that in a moment when you get really activated and you're not really that conscious and the nervous system has gone into its response, you're more familiar with what's happening. You know the pathway back to base camp, back to kind of regulated system, and you are then able to do that. So you're building the muscles, for want of a muscle memory in the nervous system, kind of mixing all the things together, of what it is to return, which is what we're built to do naturally and normally. But because we've been denatured in so many ways from our essential human nature, our systems have kind of forgotten how to do that.
Yeah, no, thanks for putting it so well. Yeah, it's this idea of coming back to that baseline. And I think in this video, you also talked about, so training, which you just mentioned, that training yourself to be able to come back to that baseline more easily, so that in times of stress, so you're doing that when you're not stressed, like that's just part of your everyday practice. So you're building that muscle. And then,
although often when you do it, you find that you're probably more stressed than you realize. So that was my observation. When I first started training, I was like, this is really good. So I would put an alarm on my phone 5 times a day.
Yeah.
And I would check in, where am I in my nervous system? And this is what it shows you. Like I said, it's about being flexible. So a little bit of what we call sympathetic energy, which is that energy of mobilization, fight, flight, can be useful. right? I've got a big deadline. I've got a charge here. Great. Nothing wrong with that. Or a bit of, oh, I'm just done. I'm cooked at the end of the day, dorsal. I'm over it. Maybe that's good. We need to rest at that point. So we want to be able to access those states, but we don't want to get stuck there. We don't want to stay there. So, and coming back to your point, yes, doing it when we don't need it means that because of the nature of the fight, flight, collapse response and the way that the brain works, so the limbic system and the alarm system of threat gets a bit disconnected from the rational prefrontal cortex part of the brain. So the part of the brain that can do the threat assessment gets a bit disconnected and goes offline. So practicing when we're not stressed means that we start making connections between those different parts of the brain. We thicken those connections so that in a moment when there's a true threat and there's a big alarm going off, those two parts have kind of learnt to work together. So the amygdala sounds the alarm. I'm simplifying massively, but sounds the alarm. And then the prefrontal cortex, there's enough familiarity for the prefrontal cortex to go, oh, let me check. Is this a threat I need to respond to or not?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's that response that we have that then governs the next part of the process as well, isn't it? You know,
exactly.
Whether we get heightened awareness or whether we can calm ourselves down or and that
exactly.
Yeah, and it's a really interesting concept. There was something else I was going to ask you. This is where having pre-written questions would be helpful.
Well, I've got something to say because I think I had a premonition, I don't know, but that you might have wanted to ask about this part, which was the preparation part. That video that you're referring to was talking about regular regulation. So you practice, but you also prepare. So you understand what triggers you and you understand why, so that when it happens, you're not, again, it's that same process of bringing your cognitive faculty into relationship with the rest, okay, your feelings, your nervous system reactions, and strengthening that connection so that when it happens, you're not lost. So again, we've got that same experience. At the moment, we feel lost, and we're designed to. The nervous system is designed to take over. If there's a threat, and we're thinking primal systems, if there's a threat that's real, like a saber-toothed tiger or whatever it is, you don't want to be standing there going, should I run or not, right? You want that kind of level of The issue that we have today is that threats and stresses are coming in at the rate of knots in an average day, coming in thick and fast, such that, you know, we didn't have that back then like that. And so our nervous system is going full throttle constantly. So we are having to learn a slightly new skill, which is cognitively, how do I recognize what's going on in my nervous system by the sensations I have in my body, the stories I'm telling myself right now, the feelings that I'm having. And as you begin to do that preparation and practice and map out the things that trigger you and why, you start to see patterns. You start to see that, I get triggered by everything. You actually don't. There are like a set, all my clients over time, there are like these themes. And it might be different people involved or a slightly different context. But if you kind of dig a little deeper, you'll see that the storyline, there's this common storyline. So I was working with a client just this morning actually about this. And she has a storyline of there is a particular person involved, but anything that happens that involves some sort of coincidence, it's a funny thing, triggers this whole thing around paranoia, So her capacity to know that means that when it happens the next time, it doesn't happen as intensely. She's ready for it. Oh, there's that storyline. There's that pattern in my nervous system. I'm prepared for this. Then she also knows, okay, what do I need to do when this happens? What is the pathway back to regulation for me? And the other part of regular regulation is practicing, well, which are the tools that are most effective for me? For you, it might be 3 deep breaths. For me, it might be jumping up and down. Like, what is going to bring my body into a more balanced state? And everybody's nervous system, everybody's patterns are different.
Yeah, no, that's a really great point. And I love that you shared that about your client, about the storyline and the patterns that brings. As I think a lot of us have these story. I mean, we probably all have these storylines, you know, whether we know it or not, but just thinking about that, I'm like, oh yeah. And like, and how does that show up in our family, in our friends, you know, like when we see them and them reacting to certain things, it's like, oh, what's this? I'm just like, my mind is just spinning out now, like, oh, what's their storyline? What's their storyline? Yeah. And I think, you know, if we want to overcome these challenges and regulate ourselves, then we obviously need to look at what those storylines are and start to work on recognizing them when they show up, like you said. So yeah, really important work. Lots to think about. There was something else I wanted to discuss with you, and we were in a call the other week when you said we can't think our way out, we have to feel our way out. Like we have to feel our way out of survival states. And I thought that was really interesting because I was thinking about myself, you know, because, you know, we all, you know,
pretty solipsistic creatures. Yep.
Yeah, that's right. You know, and I was thinking about a time not that long ago, maybe even last week, when I was just like in this intense anxiety spiral, and I was just like trying to think my way out of the situation, you know, like I could do this, or I'm going to look at that, or like, you know, just trying to think my way out of it. And it was just going nowhere, and it was just getting worse. And, you know, I think I ended up just getting up and taking the dog for a walk or something like that. Just
did that make a difference?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And then probably talking to someone about it, and then just maybe, yeah, getting some third-party advice or something like that, and just then reminding myself that, yeah, it's all the stories in my head that are really driving this, you know. So, yeah, I'd like to hear more about this sort of idea of feeling our way out. Like, can you break that down a little bit more for us?
Sure. So when we go into a survival state, it's generally something that we experience in the body. So when you talk about, I felt anxiety, yes, you came to this place where you noticed thoughts spinning in your head, but where would you say like, what is anxiety?
Yeah. So like churning stomach and
right
shoulders and
exactly.
Yeah.
So there are all these emotions are experienced in the body, not thoughts are experienced in our mind, whatever that actually truly is. I don't know. And emotions are experienced in the body. So when the nervous system is in an activated state, they have in the polyvagal theory, which is where I've kind of learned all of this stuff. Stephen Porges, Porges, for anyone that's listening and wants to nerd out on neuroscience research and the theories, polyvagal, Polyvagal.
Yep.
They have a phrase that's state creates story. So all those stories we were talking about, all the thoughts in your head are coming from the quote unquote dysregulated state of your nervous system, the anxious state of your nervous system, the survival threatened state of your nervous system. So you observed it, you saw it, that we can't tell our body just with our thinking what we need to do. Our body, our state needs to change. Our body needs to experience a shift. And so I thought it was really interesting that the first thing that you said you did was walk, right? You moved.
Yeah.
So in moving the body, you were able to move the energy through, you were able to feel differently in your system, which then allowed you to take those further actions, which probably then allowed you to feel differently as well. So we need to, when we're in a state, we can't talk our way out of it. We can't think our way out of it as much as the kind of early CBT and, you know, what are they all? I love them, but, you know, the Wayne Dyers and Louise Hayes and back in the day, it's just all about your thoughts. Thoughts are very powerful, but state comes first. So the way I think about it, and I don't know 100% if this is purely accurate or where I got this from, but it makes sense to me that the energy, the electrical impulses, the chemical transmissions, the energy fired between neurons travels at like 437 miles an hour or something. Like it's super fast.
Super fast, yeah.
Yeah. So the nervous system is just bang. And that's happening in the body. We're also, again, I don't know the pure neuroscience of this and which nerves, but I think it's the vagus nerve and maybe other nerves. There's like 80% of the information that's being transmitted between brain and body is afferent, which means it's coming, I think this way, coming back from the body into the brain. Only 20% is efferent, going out from the brain to the body. So in actual fact, our body, so if you think about that, the brain, 20% in control, 80% in control from the body. So the body is the thing that is telling us what's going on. So the body needs to be brought into a state and a space of feeling safe and feeling okay. And that is feeling our way out. Then the thoughts change. You might have noticed that. Go for a walk. I just start thinking differently.
Yeah, it's powerful. It's yeah. And I think that's where a lot of people get stuck, you know, maybe because they don't get up and start moving, or they're, you know, they don't know the right way to move that's going to change.
That comes back to the regular regulation, because that's where you observe for yourself what works for you. So like I'm constantly blown away by practicing these little tools with clients and seeing the impact. When you map it out and you look at the trigger and you see where you are and you monitor where you are in your nervous system, and then you do something super simple, like, you know, the tools often come from elsewhere. It might be a yoga tool. It might be a Chinese medicine tool. It might be a EFT tapping. It can, you know, it can be a different type of breath practice, breaks down into breath, movement, sound, might be humming, might be singing. There are all these different things that you can do. And each one will affect each person slightly differently, because their nervous system will have been shaped slightly differently. We all have grown up in different contexts. So the regular regulation allows us that time to observe and practice and go, do you know what? For me, when I'm in a dorsal state, so at the bottom of the autonomic ladder in polyvagal theory, which means a lack of mobilization. So I've gotten overwhelmed. I couldn't fight the saber-toothed tiger, and now I'm going to play dead so that maybe this won't hurt so much, or maybe it will run away. And to come out of that state, for me, it might be a long hot bath. And for you, it might be a walk down by the beach that's the most effective, right? So when we practice, we start to notice and map what is it that most effectively works for me. And what was the beginning question here? Because I'm not sure if I made the link you were asking me about.
That's a good question.
Good question.
We were talking about feeling our way out.
Yeah. So I'm just riffing. I'm continuing to riff. So so then you know what has the most impact on the way you feel.
Yeah. I'm wondering what your thoughts are of napping as a way, or sleeping as a way also of changing state, because I know that I've been instances where I've been tired and I feel that's contributed to my state of whatever I'm in. And sometimes I just need to shut down and just go, that's it, lie down for 10 minutes, close my eyes and just zone out. Would you think, is that a way also of doing that?
100%. And I would probably put that in the bucket of regular regulation. So, you know, our common friend and coach, George, talks about doing it before he needs it. And that to me is a pure example of regular regulation. So I'm going to relax. And as I was talking about before, we're all under pretty constant and consistent stress. So I used to talk about this a lot when I was still in the workplace, and I was the same kind of evangelical nervous system regulation person I am today, but teaching it to my colleagues. And it's like, when you do that, you know, you wake up in the morning and then something, you kind of maybe feel okay or whatever. Let's assume you've got some access to baseline, and then bam, there's an email, bam, there's a phone call, bam, there's a unhappy customer or whatever. There's like shots of adrenaline and cortisol and nervous system survival state activation going on. And then we are people who don't return to baseline very easily. So we're just adding, intensifying that, intensifying the state of dysregulation. So having those naps is just going to bring us back to baseline or close to much more frequently. Plus, I think we're just in a deficit of rest in our culture these days. Drink more coffee and just keep churn and burn your entire system.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So again, also a regulated nervous system requires rest. So it's we have this idea, I think, in Western culture of the quick fix or the one way or the thing, the thing that's going to fix things. And it's like, it's not like that.
Yeah.
It's little pieces and little combinations and little bits of this and little bits of that. And through all of that, we find a balance. We're not meant to be speedy all the time. We're not meant to be sleeping all the time. We're not meant to we're meant to be flexibly moving between different experiences all the time, every day. And that's the rhythm of regulation.
Yeah. And it's a toolbox, like you say. It's like, you've got to find the right tool for the right state. Sometimes it's
absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's where theory comes in quite nicely, because up until Stephen Porges proposed, so up until that point, the idea of fight flight was very familiar. So that's the sympathetic charge, energy, too much mobilization. But the idea of what he calls dorsal vagal state, a collapsed state, hadn't really come into being, it wasn't known all that much. And particularly for people who had traumatic experiences and had found themselves not reacting to those experiences, they felt really like not shame, maybe like I've had this weird experience where I didn't fight back or I didn't run away or I didn't do the thing. And he was able to explain the idea of another aspect of the nervous system. Actually, no, that is another response, nervous system survival response. And so what's going on in the system in those two different states is quite different, and they are hierarchical. So our baseline, they call it the autonomic ladder. Our baseline is at the top of the ladder. So if you picture a ladder, you're at the top and you feel safe. You got to feel safe to stand at the top of the ladder, and you've got perspective. You can look out over the world. There's space around me. I feel fine. Oh, I don't feel safe. Climb down the ladder. I'm in the middle. I'm in sympathetic. I want to punch things. I want to run away. And then we go to the bottom of the ladder when we go to dorsal. Okay. And the reason they're on a ladder is because they're hierarchical. To come out of dorsal, we have to pass through sympathetic before we can get to the top of the ladder. So if we've gone into that collapsed state and we want to get back to safety, we need to bring some energy of mobilization in first, come up into a little bit of a mobilized state. We don't want to be completely collapsed. And then we want to regulate from that as well. We don't want to go too speedy and too much energy in the system. Want to regulate, and then we can come up into I'm calm, safe, connected, socially engaged. It's called the social engagement system.
Yeah, interesting. So yeah, I'm intrigued by that ladder, those states. Are you able to give a bit more of an example of coming back up the ladder, what that would potentially look like?
Yeah. So say all right, I'll use examples from my own life. So say I've got a university assignment and it's really, really hard, and I'm really busy with work and all these other things are going on, and I'm starting to get stressed. And then I go into sympathetic and I start running around trying to do everything, staying up late, whatever. Then that's not working and it's feeling pretty crappy. So I give up. I collapse and I want to hide under my doona for 4 days with Netflix and Dominoes, right? So I can't go straight from Netflix and Dominoes to, I feel connected to everyone in the world and everything's good, because I'm just not moving. I'm not moving in that state. So I need to get moving first from dorsal. So I might say, okay, it's like re-embody, come back into my body. It's a little bit of a dissociative kind of experience, the dorsal state. So I need to do something that's quite gentle. So it might be the example I gave you before, maybe a warm bath, maybe a hug, maybe a walk, maybe a big long cry and listening to a really sad song, kind of something that's very viscerally engaging, starts to get energy moving in my body.
Yeah.
Then I might be, okay, so there's a bit of energy moving. I'm in sympathy. I'm coming up the ladder. I've got some energy and I'm starting to feel a little bit sympathetic.
Mm.
So rather than keeping on going and just staying stuck in sympathetic, I'm like, okay, in sympathetic, they say you need to discharge the energy in an organized fashion. So what did I do in my example? So I've been studying, I've come out of Netflix and pizza, and let's say for me, what I would probably do is take a walk at the beach and feel the ocean on my feet and da-da-da. Then I might come home and do something like organize the cupboards, something that can kind of get the energy out in an ordered fashion and that is regulating for that sympathetic state. And then I can find myself, okay, now I feel calm at the top of my ladder.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes sense. Yeah. I think an idea popped in my head as you were saying, like, organize the cupboards. I'm like, oh, is that procrastination though? But I guess it's
procrastination. It depends, right? Procrastination to me is just a dysregulated nervous system. And in that case, if you're doing it intentionally as a way of bringing yourself back to calm,
yeah,
not procrastination, because you're not going to be able to do anything when you're in that weird state. In fact, sometimes working really hard at something when you're in a dysregulated state is more procrastination, because you're not effective. Your brain's not working.
I experience that all too often. And I'm aware of it too. Like I'm dysregulated, but I'm going to try and just do this anyway. And it's like, I'm never productive, never get it done. And it's like, I should just walk away and like you say,
take those 5 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's got to be intentional. So and that's where bringing the cognitive piece in becomes so important. Like that self-awareness. What am I actually doing? Oh, no, I'm taking 5 minutes to test out. And when I was taught to do this, one of the things I was taught to do as well is to scale it on a scale of 1 to 10. So again, helps bringing the cognition. I'm working hard. I'm being like a workaholic. I'm trying to do this thing. I'm being completely unproductive. And I'm at about a 7 out of 10 on my sympathetic nervous system. I'm going to take 5 minutes to jog around the block, and I'm going to come back. And where am I on my nervous system now? Oh, I'm actually only 2 out of 10 now on the sympathetic scale. Okay, maybe now I can, do something effective or productive. So having that awareness of doing it intentionally rather than, okay, I can't do this and I'm going to go off for 2 hours jogging. That's a different thing when you hadn't scheduled it, etc.
And I think, I love that example you've just given. And I think it's also come down to giving ourselves permission, because a lot of the time when I get into that state, it's like, oh, but I'm supposed to get this done. If I don't get it done, and there's this guilt and it's like, no, I just actually need to give myself permission to take that 5 or 10 minutes to discharge or, regroup, do something physical, and then come back to it. And again, like you say, I love that idea of like checking in with yourself, like, where am I feeling right now on that sympathetic scale? And then after, I'm going to use that. I'll let you know how I go.
I'd love to hear. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And just one final thing before we wrap up. I wanted to talk about or discuss the idea of the news. I've just done some recent chats with some of my clients, and a few of them have said, they worry a lot, and, they watch, and I say, do you watch the news? Like, yes, I watch the news. And it's like, and I think there's a really big connection between watching the news and general media in general and this sense of worry and heightened sense of worry that people have. I stopped watching the news a few years ago, and I just hear about things through other people, which is great. Feel a bit disconnected at times, but that's not a big deal.
Your nervous system's a bit happier.
But I'm just so much more happy about the whole thing. So, how, these people, especially, and I'm sure people, and we all know people that watch the news and get a lot of, I don't know if they get a kick out of it, but just hearing about the terrible things going on in the world, it's like, oh my God, that's so terrible. What's the effect that's having on people? And do you have any thoughts or ideas to share about how people can manage that better?
Yeah, sure. I don't know if I told you, Leah, but I actually trained as a journalist.
That's right. Yeah.
and had decided not to go down that particular rabbit hole of a career. And there's a few things going on. So absolutely exposing yourself to the doom and gloom that is the news on a frequent basis is going to be absolutely triggering the nervous system in the ways that we've just been talking about for the last half an hour. So it's going to be stress, overwhelm, etc. The thing about it that's so additionally impactful is that we are talking about disasters and wars and all these things in places where we have no agency. There's really not that much we can do. So we're just adding all this stress, and then we're not balancing it out with a sense of, okay, I can contribute, I can balance that out with something that I can do in the world, which is very disempowering. So I understand, like I'm a moderate consumer of the news. So, and I think a lot of people that you might speak to who'd be saying this, they want to stay informed. And I get that. I understand that.
Yeah.
So my, I guess the way that I would help people or support people to consider approaching it that might have less of an impact and allow them to be less in a dysregulated, worried state would be the same thing, conscious consumption. So not doing it first thing in the morning, giving yourself space to, so along with regulation, I have a thing called resourcing, or I don't, out of all these materials I've learned, there's a process called resourcing. So resourcing is really nourishing the nervous system with bigger practices. So maybe it's a long walk in the morning or a big long swim or a long meditation or whatever you do, where you've really got that time to nourish the nervous system, maybe a yoga practice, right?
Yeah.
And then the regulators are the things that you can do quickly over the course of the day. So I would say, don't watch the news first thing in the morning, resource yourself first. So play your music, have your nice smoothie, do a walk, whatever, are your ways of caring for yourself, and then put boundaries around it. So I'm going to read this much for this long, and that's it. And then understand, what can I, like, have a conversation with yourself. What can I influence and what can't I? That whole locus of control conversation has to be had. We have to have that chat with ourselves. And if the nervous system has gone into a state of dysregulation as a result of reading it, then you're going to have to go through the body. So you might read the news and go for a walk, So I would be doing it very consciously, because this is consumption. So it's not food, but it's material that's going into your mind and into your brain. So be conscious about what you're consuming. Think about the news sources, think about how much, think about how to do it moderately, understand what you do and what you can and can't control. And if it dysregulates you, regulate.
Beautiful. Thank you. Some great tips there. Yeah. I just think about, when the times of day that people engage with the news, whether they're driving, like commuting to work or eating dinner or things like that, and we're usually multitasking as well. So I think that's something else to be aware of that can help with that. Yeah. Mindfulness, mindfully consuming things more as well.
I mean, I've done a big full circle back to mindfulness, which was my original training back in my late teens, when I came across my favorite teacher, the Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh, and the mindfulness. And he was talking about this back then. He was already teaching all about this. And the fact that we are multitasking, the fact that we never have silence, that we never have solitude, is not doing us any good.
Yeah. Beautiful. All right. So there's a few things to practice and take away from this conversation today. I love it. I really enjoy time to check in with you. It's such a rich experience. So thank you for your time today, Mira. I'm looking forward to sharing this with our audience. And so if you are listening or watching this, please leave a comment. Let us know what you think. What's one big takeaway that you got from this discussion today, and how can you perhaps use some more tools for regulation in your own life? Would love to hear your comments and thoughts. So thank you so much, Mira. It's been lovely.
I always love chatting to you, and thank you for the opportunity, inviting me back on. It's lovely to share this. amazing materials.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you.